Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I'm talking about a film called Action Jackson. For those who saw like Rocky or Predator, this film stars Carl Weathers. Obviously, there's Mr. Apollo Creed right there. This is an action movie that came out in the late '80s. This is a film that I did a little research on too, even before watching it. Was supposedly going to set up some type of like a franchise for Carl Weathers if it was a really successful film, like if it was a big box office success and it made a lot of money and people liked it and all that kind of stuff. This potentially would have set up a series of films, kind of like a Lethal Weapon or a James Bond, kind of like an ongoing kind of thing if successful. Unfortunately, it was not. It didn't sit well with critics. It made money. I guess there was also a problem too where a smaller company that owned the rights to this character got bought out by, I think, Sony, I believe. And then Sony, when they owned the studio and things like that, they really didn't want to pursue this character or anything like that. But let's talk about Action Jackson since this is my movie review for you today overall. Um, in this film, um, Carl Weathers plays this cop who goes by the nickname Action Jackson, and there's this automobile businessman that is getting into trouble because he's responsible for all these killings. He wants to kind of wipe out his competition, but he's doing it through these private businesses and hiring assassins and doing the killings himself and things like that. And so it's this ongoing problem in the city. And so it's up to Action Jackson, who's basically hired to solve this case and to track down this person. And as the film progresses, he meets up with this late night club singer that's played by the actress slash singer Vanity. She was kind of big in the 80s and 90s and that kind of stuff. She's right there. Um, she kind of becomes his love interest since he's not married anymore. And so obviously, both as a romantic interest and as somebody who claims to know this businessman, she's willing to help Action Jackson out and solve the case. And throughout the course of this film, they have to figure out, where this guy is. He seems to be hard to track down. Everybody who comes in contact with him seems to die, so it's hard to stay in contact or get in contact with somebody that knows like directly where this guy is. And that's over the course of Action Jackson, where he has to figure out how to stop this guy once and for all. So overall, guys, Action Jackson, for the most part, kind of like what I was mentioning earlier, is a disappointment. I guess the biggest disappointment for me personally is I saw the potential behind this. I saw something that could have been really good if they hired the right people to direct it and to write it. Unfortunately, they hired a director where I think this is directorial debut. I don't really know any other Craig Baxley films, unfortunately, so I'm assuming that Action Jackson, whatever else he worked on, it was all he's worked on. Joel Silver's obviously produced a lot of films, so I've known who he is. He even produced Weird Science, which is one of my favorite films. Um, I just don't think the right people were hired for this. I don't recognize the writer for the movie. I think it's just one of those unfortunate cases where a really cool idea with the right people hired for it to appear on screen were hired, but it just didn't come together the way it should have. So let's go over some positives and negatives of things that worked for Action Jackson, but why at the end of the day we never saw a sequel and why it really wasn't a huge hit. It made money, and that's probably the biggest success that it did. But other than that, and obviously a lot of people involved with this were big later on, like Sharon Stone and Craig T. Nelson and everybody else like that. But this movie in particular was not a very huge success outside of people were going to the theater to see the movie. But for my positives and negatives of Action Jackson, Carl Weathers in the lead role, I knew he was going to nail the role. I knew with him playing Apollo Creed and him playing his role in Predator, this was no problem for him. He definitely brought the right charisma to the role. And I overall like this character. It's definitely a character where everybody kind of spreads rumors about him. He's so tough that, anybody that talks about him kind of gets the chills just talking about him just because of how tough he is. So I really like this character, and I thought Carl Weathers was a great choice to play this character. Vanity is a love interest, what I thought was another good thing about the movie. She's very attractive. She has a great singing voice, like she did in real life back when she was alive. She has since passed away, unfortunately. I believe a couple of years ago, 2016, I believe, is when she passed away. I know she developed some type of a drug addiction and all sorts of trouble later in her life. But in this film in particular, she was great as the love interest. She really was very attractive. She really um, was, for the most part, a pretty interesting character. Um, she has struggles of her own that she kind of manages to let go of by the end of the movie. Um, so I just really enjoyed what she brought to the movie as far as like a love interest goes and helping Action Jackson out with this major case. And like I said, I really did see the potential of this becoming a franchise. I think, once again, if they just hired the right director, hired the right writer, pursued the film in such a way, I think this film would have been a huge success. And obviously, Carl Weathers was known for both Rocky and Predator at this point in his career. This film came out in 1988, so obviously he's done 4 Rocky films at this point, the one Predator film at this point. Um, and this would have been 2 years before Rocky V, which he was not involved with at all. Um, but I really did see the potential behind this, and it's really too bad that for the moments that were kind of cool and worked, there's a lot of things that don't work about it, but I definitely saw the potential of this working if done correctly. And I also thought the action scenes overall were pretty decently staged. There's not a ton of action in this film, believe it or not, for being called Action Jackson. But when the action does happen, whether it is the opening or a car chase that happens in the movie or the final showdown in the movie between him and Craig T. Nelson or any of those really, the action scenes are really decently filmed here. So as far as action was concerned, when it happens, it's very well filmed. But for my negatives of Action Jackson, though, the script here is very bad. It really is not a very good script. And that's ultimately why I don't think this film works very well. It's just the script is really not very good. It really doesn't make a lot of attempts to be very interesting at times. And it really is just scenes that play out that happen to involve Action Jackson or happen to involve the Craig T. Nelson villain. And it just kind of plays out in a very unusual manner. And just the script for this, you can tell, was just not very well done. Not a lot of care went into it. And that's ultimately, I think, why the film failed. Also, Action Jackson really doesn't have much of a focus, and there's really not a lot of character development here. Besides Action Jackson himself and the love interest played by Vanity here, there really is no character development. You really don't understand the villain. You don't understand kind of what made him snap and do these really terrible things. You don't really understand these side characters that are his cop friends. They have no development at all. You really don't get to know any of them. There really is not a lot of focus here, and I think that's another problem with the script is it just doesn't know what Action Jackson wants to be. There's even times where it feels like it's becoming a different genre. There's even scenes I think where Action Jackson is singing a musical number briefly, and there's scenes that turn into a comedy, and it just really does not know what it wants to be at times. So the lack of focus really hurts the movie. And like I mentioned earlier, the side characters and the lead villain played by Craig T. Nelson are unfortunately pretty lame here. I mean, that's too bad because Craig T. Nelson obviously went on to become famous for Coach and The Incredibles and tons of other great movies. Unfortunately, Action Jackson was not one of them, and unfortunately, he did not play a very good villain in this movie. And you also have Thomas F. Wilson from the Back to the Future films who played Biff. He plays one of the cop friends in this. No development at all. You really don't get to know him. He just kind of shows up in a couple of scenes. Sharon Stone has a role in this movie. She's in the background of the poster. And it's really kind of conflicting because for a while you think she might be the love interest. And then obviously Vanity does. And there's really no point to her character besides just displaying how evil that Craig T. Nelson villain is, really. I guess even that's kind of a spoiler. I'm sorry, but this film is not really that great, so you're not really missing that much. But anyway, the side characters and villains here are just really not very good. And overall, Action Jackson, there's really not anything. It's not really about anything. It's one of those movies where, yeah, they're at the core, it's this cop tracking down this terrible person responsible for these crimes and stuff. But overall, it's really not about anything. It's really could have been about anything, really. And I think that's another thing that hurts the movie is it doesn't really know what it wants to be, and it doesn't really know what it's about. There's also really no like morals or a message or social commentary on anything. There's scenes that kind of suggest how corrupt the crime system can be, I guess, but even those hints don't really say anything. So there's really no kind of moral message or social commentary here, which once again could have benefited the film if they chose to go that route with it. And like I was mentioning earlier, this film is just a tonal mess from start to finish. It doesn't know if it wants to be a serious drama or a comedy or, like I said briefly, a musical number or what it wants to be, or a romance or a thriller. It really is. It really every scene in this film could have been depicted as a different genre, and it would have matched this movie just because they really didn't know what they were doing from the get-go. So it's a tonal mess. It really doesn't know what genre it wants to be. It could have been Lethal Weapon. It could have been a serious cop film. It could have been a comedy. It could have been a thriller. It could have been a romance. And at the end of the day, it just has a hard time choosing any of those, and it kind of becomes all of them. And it doesn't really work for this film very well. So overall, I'm going to give Action Jackson a 6.5 out of 10. I saw the potential here. I saw how good this could have been. I saw this could have been a great franchise for Carl Weathers to lead the way with. But unfortunately, a bad script, bad character development, the choice of no message or morals or commentary of any kind, and just the fact that the film is a total mess from start to finish does not help the movie at all. So Action Jackson, I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. I unfortunately can't really recommend it, but if you want to see the potential of what this could have been if done correctly, it's an interesting failure. Let's call it that. It's an interesting failure that I can't recommend, unfortunately, that I saw the potential for if they wanted to do a franchise. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out. I can kind of see why after seeing it. So 6.5 out of 10, and that's my review of Action Jackson.